It's time for Trench Talk, where Joe Rogan meets underground metal and heavy music. I'm your host, Flight of Icarus from MetalTrenches.com. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoy it, share it, follow us on social media, sign up for the mailing list, or better yet, sign up for the Patreon. Links down in the description. All right, so this should be kind of a interesting and a little bit different episode. I'm trying to vary up topics a little bit so that this doesn't just become like the pure controversy channel, but these episodes have been kind of popular, and just I had somebody reach out to me with some kind of insider info, said they would be interested in sort of talking. So yeah, a little mystery guest today, and we're going to be kind of going further into sort of things that have been going on in the metal community. I guess this sort of jumps off again of the episode on Deathspell Omega and then the metal controversy episode with heavy metal history. So all that said, maybe you could just jump in. I don't have any questions. We just talked about doing this about 10 minutes ago, and we're just going to see where it goes.
All right. Well, I hesitate to call it insider info because that makes it sound salacious and like I'm trying to sell something. I'm just offering a difference in opinion and experience just to keep things balanced, because although I hesitate to name certain people because I don't want to redraw attention to themselves for things they were falsely accused of, but I've never been a fan of the whole, well, let's not talk about it and hopefully it goes away and these people will focus on someone else. I'm more of a person that, I prefer you stand up for yourself and you defend yourself and not just hope that things go away. So I don't really have a direction I want to go with this. I just thought it might be a good opportunity to maybe offer just a different take on things.
Yeah, and I'm all about different takes, so wherever you want to start.
Well, I have to admit, I've been out of the loop on the whole Deathspell Omega thing, which I heard on that episode being talked about, so I actually have no idea that they were being accused of anything. I've actually been out of the loop on that band because I last checked out with them when they came out with that FAS titled album, and I had kind of gotten my fill, so to speak, on the whole orthodox ritual black metal that was coming out of France at the time, which included like, what was it, Glory or Belay and another band. I think, yeah, I can't remember the third band. It was like a trio of bands that came out of France that kind of started, in my opinion, started that whole super orthodox kind of black metal. So it's kind of funny seeing the attention being put on Batushka right now for it. It's like, well, I kind of saw this a few years ago, so.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic right there.
Yeah, don't even get me started when it comes to name controversies among bands.
It's funny. It's been funny to follow. There's been a bunch of people, I didn't really cover it because there's been so many people doing videos on it.
It's literally the same thing as the Gorgoroth situation, only in a way more premature sense that the band just started and they're already going through this.
Yeah, it does. Like I tend to stray away from drama, but there's just such a like prima donna element to it that's just like magnetically attractive, and I can't help like soaking in all the information.
Yeah, I come across people all the time like, oh, well, I don't pay attention to drama. It's like, yeah, you do. We all do.
We all have a little bit of schadenfreude inside of us.
Yeah. So I actually really enjoyed the interview that you did. I actually went into it thinking it was going to be something else. I already kind of had my critiques kind of lined up that slowly got chipped away as I listened on. It was actually pretty well balanced, to be honest, compared to other things being talked about in blogs and all that. Usually they're all one-sided, not actual conversations, just someone just sounding off to the world. And, both sides seemed pretty understanding of each other's takes. But certain things kind of irk me a little bit, I guess, when it comes to, what was it he was saying? Like, like the whole, like, I just can't understand, like, hating people for religion and this and that. But the thing that always, from when I first got into black metal when I was back in high school, like black metal is hateful music. Like we can all be real about that. It is music about hate. Not that it's something I would support, like say racism or any kind of bigotry, but we have to be real. Like the music that we all started listening to is very hateful, prejudice music. There's no getting around it. So I find it a waste of energy to go back, sort of try to go back in time and critique the music of that time, because it was a completely different social climate in every sense of the way you can think about it. So to try to apply having those earlier influences to your social standards today, I don't know, I kind of find it a bit confusing rather than focus on what's actually coming out today.
So, yeah, so the idea of looking back at music that came out during a certain time period and then applying the present day zeitgeist to that, is that what you're talking about?
In a way. I think the guy had said, what was it? They were of a different culture as well, kind of closed off from the world. So there's at least some of that understanding, which was a bit refreshing to actually hear.
Yeah, I think you're talking about, so that was in the Deathspell one with Chris brought that up, and I thought that was a valid point.
Yeah, like finally someone else is saying it. Like, let's face it, in Norway and wherever else, they were a bit closed off culturally, and, there's no internet back then. There was really no social justice except for like whatever it goes on, locally. So like, I'm trying to be careful about where I go here. Like actually one thing I find funny is certain bands you can't wear shirts of at shows today because of certain accusations. Yet I still see people being like, you don't really go after someone that is wearing a Burzum shirt still. Like that's the one band that people get away with saying, yeah, but the riffs.
Yeah. Or even Mayhem. Like, yeah, it's like if your band is big enough, it's almost like those bands have become like a meme. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. It is weird. It is weird how people pick and choose that stuff.
It is, because that's why I hesitate to bring up any of my close friends that have been accused of things falsely, because when you're of a smaller stature, that's what the Antifa seems to go after. It's like, okay, we can have the muscle to go after these bands. So that's where I'm trying to be careful about what I say and who I talk about, because I don't want to bring back any of that kind of volatile backlash against them once again. And
well, I mean, maybe without bringing up the band names, you could just talk a little bit about sort of like what the accusations were and what the fallout of that was.
So there's a band up here in the Pacific Northwest that is a bit of a supergroup. It's more of the neo-folk acoustic style, and they were on tour. And of course, going down to Oakland, of all places, they get an accusation thrown at them, and the show gets canceled. And they refuse to acknowledge that one member of the band is Jewish, of both, in a belief sense, not race, but in his beliefs. And it's one of those things where, well, we make the accusations and we feel good about making the accusations, so we're not going to, apologize whatsoever, even though we're in the wrong.
Well, and that reminds me too, I know Uwada got in hot water for being
that is like so dumb.
Yeah.
I've known those guys for a long time, way before Uwada. And for them to get any kind of accusations, especially, okay, I'm going to be a little bit of a shit here, from a recent ex-member who's being a sore loser about, getting himself kicked out of the band, now is, blowing the fascism rape whistle on them. It's just petty. Those guys are not fascist or racist in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. And I brought them up because specifically they were another band that were like, we have Jewish members too. Like, yeah, that just doesn't make sense.
And I can be up front. There are people are really focusing on bands up here for a lot of, I think if you're just folk in any type of way with your music, they automatically think that you're, racist and fascist. It's really weird. It's soft acoustic music that is like the antithesis of hateful.
Yeah, I mean, we look at folk in the 60s and 70s. That was like peace music, and now it's like, nope,
somehow it's
anymore.
become hate. Yeah. And there are people up here that are in the more extreme side of black metal that I can definitely say are racist and kind of fucked up. And they're doing this stupid, we need Nazis in black metal, make black metal dangerous again, this and that. But that is a very small, minute, no one gives a shit about these people anyways, factor of the population.
Yeah, that's been my read on it too, is like, it just goes into the whole idea that we're so plugged in all the time. And because of social media and these stories being so prominent, it seems like it's everywhere. And so I think people have really ramped up the intensity of it, when really I agree with what you say. Like, it's not a big thing. Like, it's as small as it ever was. It's just easier to hear about it.
It's like they're making it dangerous because they're giving them attention.
Yes. And that's a big point that comes up here in Portland quite a bit. Is
I can't even imagine. I got my friends down in Portland, and I'm like, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with what's going on down there, even though it's only a couple hours away. I have to admit, it's way more intense where you guys are at.
Yeah, especially lately. Like, and again, I always try to avoiding overly political, especially, I don't want to be like partisan. I just want this to be a discussion, but just to apply to your point, it always makes me think of, people freak out because Patriot Prayer comes and marches through here. And yes, they are like a pro-America kind of nationalist group, but they're not a white nationalist group. They're led by like a Hispanic guy, and they have like multiple non-white members. But the funniest thing to me is that they come through, and whether you think they're idiots or not, they're not doing anything, but they're looking for a fight. And so once Antifa shows up and they give them the fight, that's when things always get crazy. I'm like, just give them a chance to just march through with completely uncontested and ignore them. Trust me, they'll get bored and they'll go away. Like, nothing will happen. It's that escalation
we've all
where
had
things
those
go wrong.
discussions, and I've, had those thoughts as well, but it's all a shit show. I mean, it's never going to get any better. No one's going to reason with each other, so it's like watching a fucking train wreck.
It is in slow motion, but
I try to stay out of it because, just to give a bit of background on myself, I grew up in a very racist household, and I grew up being very racist and had a lot of prejudices that took a very long time and lots of personal tribulation and turmoil to come to terms with and get over and past. And I have to say, through music, metal, hardcore, all this stuff, like, I was one of those guys. I used to watch American History X, a total anti-racist movie, but I was one of those guys that would watch it and get ramped up by it.
Yeah.
Because I had those beliefs and feelings. But at my core, I'm not a joiner type. So at my most racist, I could never subscribe to being part of any kind of racist group or any kind of organization. Same with years later, being involved in the music scene around here, or at least behind the scenes. I was more on the side of booking shows and everything, watching friends get involved with certain ritual music scenes and stuff that I was very much about on an esoteric level and very nature worshiping level. I still I just have this inability of following in a group or a scene or any kind of organization. I always have to question people to death and be like, well, I like certain things about this and that, but I'm still going to go my own way.
Yeah.
Kind of deviated there for a second, but anyways, through a lot of this music around here, namely the cascade. I hate using the word cascading because it's whatever. Through this music around here, it helped me eventually over time, because it wasn't just a flick of the switch. Oh, I need to change my ways. It took time, but through this music, I was able to come to terms with the bullshit that I was raised with and have completely changed in a lot of ways. Granted, we all like to make off-color jokes from time to time, but we're human.
Oh, yeah. I'm a big player of Cards Against Humanity, so I know what you're talking about.
When you grow up listening to Richard Pryor and Sam Kinison for comedy, you have that kind of sense of humor.
Yep. Eddie Murphy, George Carlin, that was Mel Brooks. That was all my stuff too.
So I gained a lot through the music around here of this. I'll just call it the ritualist black metal scene. I had to learn a lot about myself and actually put my foot in my mouth a lot of times where I said or did something stupid because I was still holding on to past bullshit that eventually through, baptism by fire in a way, I had to do a lot. I had to answer for myself a few times and have, we all still grow. There's a lot about myself that I'm still, changing and coming to terms, or even just plain being honest with myself about. But I have this music that the Antifa is trying to label as something. It's the music that has been the main force that changed my old bigotry.
It turned you around as opposed to, they have this view that the music is transforming you into a racist when what I've seen is more so what you're talking about. It can turn people to the right way.
Yeah. So when I see this whole, punch Nazis, do this and that, all I can think of, what? If they had done that to me back then, that would have made me dig my heels in so much fucking deeper. And I became a worse person than I was.
Yeah, again, it's that escalation. Like, that's just human nature. And I encounter that constantly in my daily work. Is the more I have to coach parents on this all the time when they're working with their kids. It's like, stop getting like face-to-face confrontational about it. Trust me, they're just going to push back even harder. And unfortunately, like, adults are the same way. Like, we never really grow out of that. Like, when somebody like gives you a hard time and is like, stop doing that, you just want to do it more. Like, that's just
right.
That's just how it's a big middle finger in their face.
And it's funny because in the past couple of years, I've really gotten into hardcore music, like, the New York stuff and all that stuff that I just never gave a chance when I was younger. I was just more about metal and, if it ain't super fast tremolo picks and death grunts, I wasn't into it. But I see that, you see a lot of the, with New York hardcore and certain other things where it was definitely a very, politically minded music. And a lot of it, was anti-racist and all this and that. I kind of have this thought where I don't know if it would have had the same effect on me, because what this ecocentric black metal that went on around here, it spoke to me on a certain level that only came about because of the environment we grew up in this region, with being amongst the mountains and the animals. And honestly, it kind of in a lot of ways, like the Norwegians, we grew up without being socially minded, unless you were in the punk scene. Yeah, you did. But without that, we were isolated. And me and my close friends, we grew up thinking that we were the only ones, even as far as like 11th grade in, 2004 or 5, thinking that we were the only ones being into black metal around here, not knowing that Wolves in the Throne Room and Ceremonial Castings was going on a little south. Like, that's how isolated that some of us still were around those late times. And where am I trying to go with that? I always tend to talk myself off into oblivion.
Oh, that's all right. We do that on here a lot.
It's just, you see a lot of similarities in things that happened as far as 20 years ago, and you still see it going on. Of course, the age of the internet and social media completely depleted that, which I'm one of those guys. I miss the days of the tape trading. That was before my time. Yeah. But whenever I read those books and the magazine, I collect old Metal Maniacs and this and that.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's like, I really wish I was older at the time and could have participated in that. But every generation has that kind of nostalgia, or wishing for a nostalgia.
Yeah, we've all got our own things. But I'm kind of curious. like, I want to kind of go back to the beginning too, because I think it's so important for you to illustrate, at least on some level, like what it was that got you into that negative ideology to begin with, and be kind of clear on that.
It was my dad raising us. You don't date black people. You don't date outside of the, white people or whatever, even though, years later I do what was it, Ancestry.com thing, and kind of made the joke. At that time I was already kind of starting to chip away my bullshit, and my dad asked, like, "Oh, why'd you do that?" And I had to crack the joke at him just to piss him off. I just want to see how black we are.
I'm sure he loved that. I'm sure he was thrilled.
No, but yeah, it was just, my dad's racism. It's what got me into that. It's what we were raised with, thinking it was totally normal.
And that's most people. I think that gets left out all the time, is that these things get passed down. It's not like you're born like good and decent and loving all people, and then magically like you hear a song or you watch a movie or whatever and it like converts you into like this sleeper agent. Like you're like the what's that movie with like the Falcon or whatever, where there's like the code word where it like turns you into this like assassin or whatever.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of the name.
Well, in any case, like, so there's that. So you were getting all these messages from your dad, again, like most people get them,
and
from
society.
The adults
I grew up in a
lives.
very small logging town under Mount Rainier, and it was socially acceptable it was never an outward kind of like a community of hate, but it was one of those like unspoken things where if you say you said something to another kid in high school or any situation, it wasn't exactly frowned upon, so to speak.
Right.
So I got away with a few things growing up. But at the same time, I grew up seeing hypocrisy because we were great friends with our black neighbors right down the road. So it's like we grew up getting these messages of you don't, date these people. We grew up calling Brazil nuts N-word toes, if you've ever heard that.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's a very dark nut it's a nut in a very dark shell that's of a certain shape. So it was like a social thing where, like a joke where you referred to them as, I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, I hear you. So but I think that helps illustrate kind of the community that you were living in, where talking like that was normalized.
But it wasn't. Yeah. It was weird. The more I think about it, especially right now, it's just there was an unspoken secretiveness to it too. Like my dad never said to like, "Hey, don't be this way out in public." It was just this weird understood thing. It's now that I'm thinking about it to myself, I'm like, that, like, how did that come about where we all knew?
You knew the line.
We were like, I don't know. That's a weird one now.
That is interesting.
Because like I said, we were great friends. We had barbecues with our neighbors that were black. And yet,
And so then, I'm interested then, like, when did you start getting into metal music, and particularly like this black metal music?
Basically from birth. My parents were 80s hair metal people. So I grew up with cassette tapes of, the first music I remember latching onto was Def Leppard. So being that, especially the Hysteria album, being that as my jumping point, I'm a sucker for melody. So of course I loved symphonic black metal years and years later. But, I grew up with, the AC/DC and Rat and all that 80s and 70s hard rock and hair and heavy metal. And, wherever you start from, in most cases, it gets darker and faster and harder. So eventually, I found Metallica, stuff like that. We did have Judas Priest, which I didn't appreciate until years and years later. And then we had the whole 90s thing with Korn. I was one of those kids. After Metallica, I got into the whole new metal stuff. Yeah. Like, I was really young, still elementary school, with Korn and Limp Bizkit and Rob Zombie. And so I had to kind of wade my way through that for a number of years. And as much as people like to roll their eyes about it, I found extreme metal through the band Slipknot.
Dude, nobody who listens to this podcast is going to roll their eyes at that. I've found almost every guest, and then also when I post memes about new metal and stuff too, like there's a lot of new metal defenders on this
I'm
channel.
shameless about, I wear my influences on my sleeve. Like I've got an Aglock tattoo, I've got a Gigi Allen tattoo, and I've got Gorgoroth lyrics tattooed on me. But my first tattoo is a Slipknot tattoo. I don't care what anybody says.
Hey man, that debut and Iowa are still among my favorite albums.
And I don't lambast any of my previous music like, oh, I can't believe I listened to that, blah, blah, blah. No. I can still go back to being that age if I hear that music. So, you got all these kids that are too punk to fuck, too cool for school about their past music. And I'm just like, whatever, that's, how you want to be. But
I think that's changing a lot, honestly. I almost encounter nobody at this point who, like, I remember in high school constantly getting picked on by the elitist kids for the music I listened to, and then even kind of into college on some level. But nowadays, like, everybody openly raves about their new metal days.
Well, yeah, because now it's doing that with the 90s now. With now that the whole EDM thing has taken off, everyone's remembering when that kind of style of music was on the radio a lot in the 90s. I remember, what was it, like music like Ace of Base and stuff like that. We all listened to that when we were kids. If you were of a certain generation, I don't care who you are, we all were listening to that shit on the radio.
We had the sign on cassette. That was in regular rotation at my house, which, funny aside, related to this topic, there is an interesting YouTube video breaking down how people think that they were a secret Nazi band too. And they actually make a pretty compelling argument, I have to say. But yeah, I should put a card for that YouTube video here for people to check out. It's very bizarre.
Oh man.
Everyone, man.
Actually, that's another just
anyone.
a slight caveat. At the same time that I was growing up with all the racism, my older sister was listening, as well as my older cousin, they were listening to gangster rap. So I had those influences at the same time as being completely prejudiced. That's really trippy to think about. Like, I was saying all the racist stuff you could think of, but I could still be bumping Ice Cube and Bone Thugs and Harmony.
Well, I think that goes to another important point too that I try to bring up, is that your brain is not fully developed till you're like 25. And so to me, kids aren't truly capable of being like actually racist. Like, I feel like kids are just imitating what they see around them. And I think that makes sense to what you're saying. Like, you are imitating the lessons and messages from your dad and from the people around you, but then we're also experiencing a visceral reaction to different kinds of music from different kinds of people, and you couldn't deny that. So
I don't know who said it first. but I'm just going to echo it. Music doesn't make people racist. I don't care if it does, whatever few people it does, those people are fucked off to begin with.
Yeah. And this is my point in asking about kind of your trajectory in metal, because we still haven't even gotten into any metal that's like considered to be racist music yet. So your so-called racism very much predates you getting into this music. To me, it's not even a chicken or the egg kind of thing. It's usually people develop racist ideas and then as a result gravitate towards racist music. Same with the argument against like violent video games. I always tell people video games don't make kids violent, but kids who are already violent because they've experienced other usually trauma and intense things in their lives tend to gravitate towards those more violent games.
One thing I will give to some of those accusations is about the movies though. Like I said, I was watching American History X and getting ramped up about it. And even today, I have like, a collection of those movies, The Believer, Romper Stomper, all those movies that were made to show the bullshit of racism and bigotry. And I watched all of those movies and was completely ignoring that little part of it and just wanting to appreciate the shit that they were trying to put a negative light on.
But as a counterpoint, do you think you would have seen that movie in the same light if you weren't growing up where you did?
It's a really good question, and I'd like to say maybe not.
I think it would be hard to test, but that's my
I think it also
theory
comes down to environments as well.
Yeah.
Like that's why I say with, this certain, this music's racist, that music, like, no, you have to break it down to each individual, each occasion of whatever controversy. You can't just blanket anything. You literally have to take things apart at its core and in an individual list, frame of viewing it. Like, you can't brush a scene except for, obviously was it a skinhead scene? Let's be real. That is a scene you can blanket.
Yeah.
Not
like
skinhead as in hardcore,
scene.
but the racist, like, the bands that are being financed by whatever his name is, Metzger and all that.
Yeah.
So that's the one caveat. So yeah, would I have become racist watching those movies without my dad's influence? I'd like to say maybe not, but I don't know. There was a time period where we had lived in California, and I experienced, what's the term I'm looking for? The people that I considered minorities, they ganged up on me, and I experienced just the opposite as to what I was putting out towards the world, or more like getting a taste of my own medicine, I guess. So, and to prove the point of the whole bullshit of punch a Nazi in the face, those experiences only hardened me with those beliefs.
Yeah. And again, I have yet to meet somebody who got attacked by, any kind of anti-fascist group and walked away from the experience going, well, guess I better change my ways. It's like, no, they buckle down, they get more of their buddies, and they say, okay, we're going to put on our helmets next time. And again, we've seen that escalation here in Portland. It used to be protesters just in plain clothes on both sides, but then it was the helmets, and then it was the body armor, and then it was shields and batons. They won't even acknowledge
the documentary. I think it's on Netflix, where that Islamic woman is making friends with these racist groups and people and documenting them. And a few of them, she actually did change through being understanding and having back and forth with them and letting them air off, say their bullshit, and then coming back with her side in a very, it did get heated in a few segments of that documentary. I wish I could remember the name of it. But I think she did 2 documentaries where it was like the same effect, where through being an understanding person and working with someone, they can realize their bullshit if you really try it. Not everyone, obviously. Some people are just that way, and that's all they're ever going to be. But you can reach at least some of them. And to me, that is a success.
You maximize your odds of making your point heard and them considering it and potentially making some changes by listening first. Right. I think what you're describing, there's a documentary, it's not on Nazis and nationalism, but it's on the men's rights movement, and it's called The Red Pill. And this lady goes into that movement with her kind of own set ideas of how it's bad and it's terrible and all these people are just evil misogynists. And then she, over the course of the documentary, from just listening, recognizes that, oh, these are just real people with real concerns and real problems. And that dialogue opening up. As a result, she does TED Talks and stuff now too. And I just think that is the way forward. That's a big part of my job too, is I walk into households and work with counselors who walk into households where the circumstances of the home are beyond belief. It is disgusting, some of the stuff that we encounter and some of the stuff that we see and hear the parents doing. And our job is to, instead of getting in their face, because I've seen specialists do this, and predictably the parents get defensive and they fight back and we don't get anywhere and we don't help the kid. Whereas what we need to do is just figure out, how do we empathize with this caregiver, even though we don't agree with what they're doing and we hate it and we are so disturbed by it? How do we listen first and help them see that we're on the same side with them and we want to help them? And eventually that's the road to them getting better and doing better by their kids.
Right. Yeah, I have to watch that documentary. I haven't really honestly looked into the whole men's rights things because to me it just seemed really dumb.
I mean, a lot of it is like, there is plenty. Just, I will say, with any group, like there's your knuckleheads, and so
I mean,
yeah.
What's less manly than crying about you're being persecuted by women?
That's how I felt about it too. But then I watched the documentary and they really kind of dig into the deeper stuff. Like they talk about the fact that there's only, I think there's 2 now, but at the time there was only 1 domestic violence shelter for men in the entire country. And it was in Arkansas. And then they also talk about how the laws are kind of unfairly stacked against men when it comes to custody battles.
Oh,
even
yes.
If the dad is the one who's kind of the more fit parent, so to speak. So stuff like that. But we're getting way off topic now.
No, that's something that's a whole nother topic.
Yes, it is.
One thing though, where I just kind of thought of something, as I said, the whole, what's less this than to complain about that. Going a bit forward here, when I had to ask Infernus of Gorgoth how you say his singer's band's name. It's Tolke, not Take.
Oh, that's great. I had no idea. I've been saying it wrong forever. Tolke?
Yeah. I had to double check that one when I was hanging out with them. When the tour got canceled for that band in the U.S., and they came out with their statement about it that was bitter, and rightfully so.
I thought it was a good statement, though, overall.
A friend of mine who's been in a few very notable bands and still is, he made the comment, which he is not surprising for this person knowing his background or his past. And he and I get along in a lot of ways that aren't exactly healthy. He made the statement of, what's more black metal than, complaining about the Antifa and this and that. And I think he didn't like that they made the comparison of being treated like black musicians being stamped out by the Jim Crow thing. To me, I
remember that part.
I do vaguely, because he went off about that part. That to me, a lot of people are ignoring. Again, there are differences in culture, and that a Norwegian band is not going to take that level of a comment of comparing yourself to old black musicians being I actually don't know much about that time, admittedly, but I guess
they have even less context, I think, is what you're saying. And
right,
they don't grow up like with like, I mean, I remember in school
understanding of that time in music in our country. So of course they're not going to know that we're going to look at it a bit more seriously.
Yeah.
So for people to focus on that part of the statement, I thought was a little like, well, yeah, they're Norwegians, like they're not going to know, how it was here.
Like, they're not like us where we're growing up with U.S. history lessons from a young age and constantly learning about civil rights music and movement and all that kind of stuff.
Well, then again, we don't know what they're being brought up to be taught in their schools either. So,
I mean, I'd imagine that they're learning more so about Finnish and Swedish history as opposed to necessarily
but then again,
U.S. history.
I remember growing up my entire 12 years of being in school, maybe not all 12, but by the time mid-high school came around, I was so sick and tired of learning about Egyptian history. That seemed to be the one thing that they constantly taught you year after year. And I was just like, I'm so sick of learning about the damn
no more
Nile
pyramids.
River.
Oh, God. Well, but going back to his statement, if I remember, even though it's not a to B comparison, I think part of the point is just a point I've made before, is that I constantly compare these kind of social justice protester types to the Tipper Gore types in the 80s. And I like drawing that comparison.
No, that's a good comparison, because
Yeah.
I've always said of them, oh, they're just, college
new
students
pearl
or kids in their parents' house looking for an identity.
Yeah, that too.
So
That
they're
too.
like Tipper Gore, they're trying to find purpose in their mundane lives.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
obviously I'm not saying that about
the-
every single one of them. I'm sure some of them have had different backgrounds and different life experiences like all of us. But as a group, the way they act and the way they just dictate how people should be and what shouldn't be allowed and this and that, it's like, I get it. You're anti-fascist and anti all of this and that, which we all pretty much are. Like, I think we're all in agreement about it.
Yes.
But the way you're going about it is making me go against you, because it is very fascist and totalitarian.
They're doing more harm than good is what I'm seeing. Like, and I think it goes back to what you said way back when, is honestly, I think their stuff, especially when they really go all out, is what tends to turn people, that turns more people towards the negative extreme than,
and now you got the
than
Wolves
anything
of
in
Vinland.
music.
Now you got the Wolves of Vinland and their popularity to thank for it.
Yep. Yeah. It's it's that constant escalation, and it just strikes me as funny. I posted a picture the other day of like not Maude Flanders, but that teacher from The Simpsons who was always like, "Oh, won't someone please think of the children?" And I'm like,
yeah.
You remember when like we all collectively thought these people were funny and we satirized them and we made fun of them? It's like,
right.
When did we become them? Like a whole bunch of, that's like everyone now. I feel like not everyone, but like the loudest people on Twitter and Facebook and in these groups, like that's how I view them. I don't view them as like these heroic figures like fighting for justice. I just see them as like these pearl clutching waspy old people like back in the 80s, and it's just I see them the same way. And don't get me wrong, like I'm all for real social justice, I'm all for fighting real fascism, I'm all for fighting for social change and making things better. I mean, that's a big part of my day-to-day is like advocating for mental health and making sure that access is equal and all that kind of stuff. But like you said, it's about doing it the right way.
Well, let me put it this way. Like I said, with my background, there's something to be said about reform when it's successful, because there is honestly, with as much as I recognize was complete bullshit with my upbringing, there's honestly not a lot I would have changed about it if I could, looking back, because it gave me the perspective that I have now. Like, I was bullied and then I became a bully. So I was a bully as much as I was bullied, even, simultaneously. And now I can look back on what I did to other kids. And now I am a bit on my niece's ass about it, like making sure or trying to make sure that she's not being that way. And I'm a bit cold. So I'll tell her straight to her face, like, if you treat kids like this, and that, you're going to end up being a target during a school shooting.
Yeah.
Like, I'm more about, just putting shit out there. No, I don't sugarcoat things. Like, you just get right to the fucking point and,
And again, those past experiences ultimately led to who you are now. And I think that that's important. Like you definitely wouldn't have the same level of perspective if you hadn't had time to kind of make those mistakes, so to speak. Like that's part of what being a kid is about. Like hopefully by the time you become an adult, you've made the mistakes and you've made some of the changes, and even in younger adulthood too. Because again, your brain's not developed till you're like 25. So I don't call adulthood like when you're like 20. I feel like I was a moron until I was like at least 25, 26, maybe even 30.
I've known people that are older than myself they're just adult children still.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to there's certain people that are just they're just dumb. They still think that again, like I already said, the whole make black metal dangerous again and this and that, and
yeah, the kind of edgy boys that I talked about in the other episode. So I am curious though. So what was that trajectory like for you in terms of the change? Because you said it wasn't overnight, but I'm really kind of interested if you can pinpoint any sort of specific
we can get a
moments.
bit chronological here. A friend of mine who's in a, very up and coming band, and actually they're just pretty big at this point. He showed me the early stuff as he was getting into it because we were in the same grade. And I have to admit, it was a bit hard to listen to like Marduk and stuff like that. I had to find I think it was Volcano by Satyricon that had come out at the time. So that was my easy door in. And then I heard Mayhem's live album, the Dead one, and it just kind of went from there. And it was never about I'm anti-religious, as anyone can be. But then again, I still listened to Zayo and all that stuff when I was a kid. Very Christian music. I don't give a fuck what a band talks about. If the music moves me, that's what I listen to. So
same here. I even reviewed a couple literal social justice and self-described anti-fascist bands lately where the lyrics were totally not where I was at, but the music was really good. So I was like, screw it. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and share Deathspell and say I can separate the music. I'll share this other stuff too.
Right. And, like I said, lately I've been really getting into hardcore, and I just had one of the greatest concert experiences of my life going to see Agnostic Front and Hatebreed a few months ago. That was
nice.
Just as amazing as flying to the Netherlands and catching Gorgoroth and Merkskog and all these other bands that I'd been listening to for fucking ever. So I guess I'm one of those types that I'm so all over the place. I can never be about one thing. It's kind of, I guess,
it's boring.
I don't know. But the trajectory to how I got to that, like I said, was through the music from this region in the Pacific Northwest. Agalloch was the big one for me and my friends. That kind of got the ball rolling with that kind of music. And then, of course, you got Wolves in the Throne Room, Fauna, the Salem scene with Leech and all those bands. And then the one-man stuff like Blood of the Black Owl and Ruhr Hunter. And through that time, while still appreciating crust and punk music at the same time, because my late best friend was all about crust. So I was listening to Amoebics and all those old British crust and hardcore bands that were very anarchist and anti-fascist themselves. So over a good, maybe 5 to 10 years, things slowly chipped away through both self introspection, looking into yourself, seeing the I'm a very stubborn person, so it was hard to be honest about my past or what I consider to be the bullshit of my past. And at the same time, I had made a few stumbles here and there with things I would say and do. Like, I was booking shows at the time, and at the same time, I was catering to the harsh noise scene. So I made an advertisement, to bring other bands in to have me book shows for them. So at the same time, I'm dealing with, let's just make a broad term of more hippie-ish, ecocentric types. I also catered to the very tongue-in-cheek, very non-politically correct noise scene, which I don't know if you've looked into before or have had any experience with.
I'm less experienced in that area, but I'm somewhat aware of it.
It's very off color. And I made an advertisement that was like, is your music about this and that? And, it was like, I really wish I could. Actually, I'm glad I don't remember it because it's very embarrassing to think about. Some of the people that were very influential to me caught wind of this, and I was in very hot water with them, and it was embarrassing on my part. I had to do a lot of damage control for myself because it was not reflective of who I was. I was just, very early in my hobby at the time of booking shows, and I had to learn a lot through, stumbling into a few fires. but I learned from it. I overcame it. Very lucky to still be great friends with some of these people that were affected by that and had put me at arm's length for a while. And, you know, again, as embarrassing for me as it was, because you never want to, you know, it's that thing of you never want to meet your idols because they could be dicks or assholes and ruin the music. No, well, it's worse when you embarrass yourself in front of your idols. And I hate to call them idols because they're not. But these people were very important to me and my friends. So that sucked. It really sucked. But there was a lot that I learned from it. So I don't exactly think that I would have taken that back if I could have. You know, looking back, you know, do a time travel, like, let's stop you from doing that real quick. I don't know.
We learn the most from our mistakes and from those difficult situations.
Yeah. So when I see the Antifa, like, okay, they got great intentions, but they are aiming at all the wrong people. Not all of them, obviously, but the majority from what I've seen, they are completely and utterly wrong. And they're just making the most blanketed umbrella statements just to make them, as far as I can tell, make themselves feel better. And it's really, it's tiring. I used to spend a lot of time, you know, I was one of those guys that was online arguing and commenting and trying to dispel things about it. And although it's so much of a waste of time, at the same time, I was like, well, if I just want to put the information out there so people can read that, as much as, you know, a lot of them would, you know, delete comments and block further commenting and stuff like that to, you know, shield the public from having a different perspective. Again, how anti-fascist are you?
But you're right, though. I mean, they're just people. They do have good intentions. I think what they want is admirable on some level, at least certain aspects of it. But it's not only just the wrong people; it's just the wrong tactics. Like they're actively working against themselves.
I will give them, given my background with, you know, not only growing up with racism, but I also read all the books and, you know, had the interest of learning about other racist groups, and not from a, you know your enemy standpoint. I had a invested interest in that stuff at the time. So when the Antifa goes after Wolves of Vinland, I'm like, okay, I'll give you that one. Because I look at the Wolves of Vinland and I see all the flags of the things I used to be or was in or believed. And I'm sorry, like, those guys are just a whole nother, like, There are a few shades of gray of being the next, what was that compound out in Idaho? That was like a big racist headquarters in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah. I think somebody else brought it up one time.
Yeah. It's like, no. You guys might have a point with those guys. Like, they actually showed up. Those guys showed up to an event out here in the Northwest that a friend of mine had started. And they showed up on their motorcycles and tried to intimidate as well as pay off the organizer of that organization for them to perform some sort of ritual around the bonfire. And the guy was like, why would I take your money and allow you to perform here when you hate the things that I am? Like, because he was a native and of certain other backgrounds. He's like, you are against everything that I am internally in my blood. Why would I take your fucking money? And that's what they do. They show up on their motorcycles, you know, all Sons of Anarchy like, and they just intimidate people. And another band that I'm really good friends with, I'll leave their name out because I know they don't want this brought up. But they were performing a show out in the woods, and one of the big Wolves of Vinland guys was beating the shit out of some kid that was just trying to have a good time in the pit. And the guy comes up to the band after their set, and, you know, the one guy in the band, he's very strong, he's muscular, very Conan, not very Conan-like, but he takes care of himself. And the Wolves of Vinland guy, he's like, he just looks at him, he's like, I've been sizing you up your whole set. And he was like, and what? Like, what do you want me to do? You want me to wrestle you or something? And they kind of got into it. And the guy was like, well, all right, I'll just buy some of your merch. And he was like, no, I don't want people like you, wearing my band stuff. Like, you guys are bullshit, and you're, I'm paraphrasing at this point, but that's what that group does. They try to say that they're not fat and racist and this and that, but I'm sorry. But
they're like out there like doing stuff. And what I like about that story over other ones I've heard is that here's a guy in the band singling out a specific guy doing something specifically wrong at the show and saying, no, that's not going to fly here. That's not welcome. I prefer that over other stories I've heard where it's like the band addresses the whole crowd and is like, if you vote for Trump, you're not welcome here. I'm like, those things are very different in my mind. Like, those are not the same thing. You have every right to like kick somebody out of your show if they're acting like a fuckhead. And just to be clear, like the tactics you're talking about with like the intimidation, the motorcycles and beating people up, fuck that shit too. Like,
right.
That's also not okay.
I'd love to see those guys go to an actual hardcore show, not guys that are grappling with each other. Like, what they do is mutual with each other, and it makes them feel like that they can get away with doing that to other people. No, I'd love to see them go to a real hardcore show and try to be that way.
Yeah, some of these people would get pretty messed up.
Yeah, because I definitely got my ass handed to me at that show and got reminded why I'm in pit retirement.
Well, the other thing that's kind of ironic here is those people, and I think the Antifa people come from a similar place mentally, because I feel like in my experience, both of those people are trying to meet the same need, just in another way. They're trying to fill some sort of void inside of themselves and make themselves feel big and important and like their life means something. It's just one of those people is going the social justice route and the other person's going the complete opposite of that. But I feel like, again, they're trying to do the same thing ultimately, and the thing that needs to be healed is the, whatever trauma and life lessons and personal issues they have that allow that void to develop to begin with.
Yeah, and I admit I wanted to like Wolves of Vinland and what they do, but I immediately, as soon as I started looking into it, I just saw so many patterns of things I've seen in my whole life, and it's like, God damn it. Because they're using, I'm all about wolves. I'm involved in wolf conservation in my region, or at least on a, political voice kind of standpoint. I used to volunteer at sanctuaries, and I see them abusing this, animals, lore and image. And that's just me being biased though. But again, I saw the bravado, the overly fucking machismo aspect of themselves. It's like, yeah, I want to live better too. I'm working out, this and that. But these guys, it's like a bunch of gym rats that started listening to Amon Amarth.
Oh, man.
That harbor some maybe racist views. I can't outright say that that's what they are, but I'm seeing things about them where I'm just like, I don't know about y'all.
Yeah. And to be fair, again, like, it's perfectly fine to make a personal decision that, like, I'm not down with this band because of X, Y, and Z. I mean, I have bands like that too for various different reasons that I just kind of avoid them. But I feel like I draw the line at telling other people how they should feel about them. Like, I'll share, if we're talking about it, I may bring up topics, but I'm never going to be like, well, you shouldn't listen to them because of this thing. Like, that's where it irritates me. And then even more so when they start boycotting shows and not allowing people to make up their own minds, like just basically treating everyone like children and saying, okay, mommy and daddy are here. We're the Tipper Gore crowd, and we're going to shut this down because we know better. It's also
great to have the balance of opinions like that, because in the tail end of when I was booking stuff, I had no prior, hold on a second. Hey, get over here. My dog's venturing a little too far. at the tail end of my booking, I got offered to help book what band was it? Not Graveland, but another band like that from the old days, Nocturnal Mortem. I'd never listened to them. That kind of style of black metal was never my thing, the whole Slavic stuff. I've never been a fan of Drudka and all that. Just doesn't tickle my fancy musically. And so I knew nothing about Nocturnal Mortem and their
I'm familiar
past.
with them, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
A friend, so I'm at my friend's house and I'm telling him, oh yeah, I just got offered to help book a Nocturnal Mortem show here. And one of the people that I'm associated with was very strong with telling me, like, you should really think twice about that, because he laid out what the band has been accused of and this and that. But he didn't tell me, you better not, and this and that. He gave me the education and the option, and that was great. And I later thought about it, and I ended up, obviously it was never going to work. The shows have been shut down immediately. But I ended up telling the person that offered to me, like, hey, thanks for the offer, but I'm not going to put my name on this. So
yeah, and that's fine, and that's up to bookers. Like, they can make their own decisions. The venues can make their own decisions. I just don't like seeing venues get like bullied into making decisions.
It was funny before I realized that, because I'd contacted one venue that had previously booked Death in June, and their whole attitudes it was just money minded. They're like, yeah, we don't give a shit. Whatever.
But with Nocturnal Mortem, like, I'm actually a fan of their music. I'm aware of their history that became clear later on. Mm-hmm. I got into them after they had already gone through a bit of a transformation in terms of their overall style, and they're another band that made like a big statement on their social media pages and basically copped to the fact that, like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, we were into all that stuff. Like, we put it into our albums. That was our ideology. But hey, like, people grow up, people move on. That's not who we are anymore. And that's not what our focus is anymore. And people can still look at that and say, well, they're just trying to cover the tracks and like their album sales are hurting or something. And so they want to like clean things up so that they can make money. But I tend to be less cynical with that, and I tend to be willing to just give people a chance to prove themselves. And so far, like, I haven't heard any new stuff on them for me to believe anything other than what they said. It seems like they have turned another leaf, and their music just seems a lot more kind of atmospheric and nature-y and
let's be real.
Folky.
Back in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, but mostly the early 2000s, it was kind of cool at the time to at least flirt with certain things. It was edgy. We didn't have the same social consciousness back then. So none of us took it with the same seriousness then, because I guess culturally everyone had to grow up maybe, but back then with like, the stuff like Pest Noir, and it's like, yeah, it was a little bit fascist minded maybe, but none of us ever thought of it as serious. Like, as far as my experience or reading online about things, no one was actively saying this about those bands. It was just a mild flirtation thing. Like, I have to say, it was like aesthetics at most. Like the same way Motorhead uses the certain garb that they had at the time with Lemmy's fascination with World War II. They were not about Nazism and this and that, but aesthetically, it's kind of flashy.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it was interesting too to see like that last documentary with Lemmy where they go through his house and he has like tons of Nazi memorabilia. But here's a guy who clearly was not pro-Nazi, did not stand for any of that stuff. He's just all about drinking and getting laid, like, but he just had some sort of fascination.
I was that guy. I used to make the joke all the time, like, come on, let's all, like, you can admit it, the Nazis were the best dressed of all the wars.
Oh no! Oh Jesus! Demonetized. Oh my God.
I mean, Marilyn Manson made it cool. Let's be real. Let's make it mainstream.
Yeah, that's
Marilyn
true.
Mason is what made it cool.
He paraded around that stuff.
Yeah, he was dressing like a total Nazi general for a while.
Rammstein has on and off done it too. I mean,
Oh,
even in
yeah.
that most recent music video.
Well, yeah, but even at my most racist, I never considered them to be any form of racist themselves. It never clicked with me that way.
Yeah, it's that people get into this stuff for all sorts of different reasons, and we have to take that into account. We also have to take into account, again, like when we're kids, we're idiots and we don't really think things through. And so that's why I also don't like I'm fine if someone gets called out for doing something like right now and like it's a clear problem, then fine. Mm-hmm. But I get irritated when it's like, well, 10 years ago, so-and-so did this show with this person. And it's like, okay, but what have they done lately? Like,
right.
People actually make mistakes.
One thing I did want to bring up in this was people like to turn, like, say, if you're examining lyrics, they like to, like they do with later eras of the Bible, they like to make things fit a certain aspect of their beliefs so that they can put it forth in a certain way. So let's take the Tolkien accusation about what was the lyric they brought up. Like, I think it's like, fuck all you, or fuck Muhammad and all you Mohammedans.
Yeah.
So they took it that as saying, fuck Muhammad and all the brown people or people of that region. Whereas if you, honestly, like the way I look at it is like, fuck this particular God and the people that believe him, regardless of wherever you're from. It's just the belief, the people that believe. It's basically the same thing as saying, fuck Jesus and all the Christians.
Yes. That's exactly.
And Christians are all over the world.
That's exactly the point that I made on the previous episode. I mean, I saw Toke in concert, shirtless with his upside down cross tattoo, bared for all. This is a guy who does not like organized religion. Doesn't matter if it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever. This guy does not believe in those types of ideologies.
And yes, he wore a swastika at one show. He wore it to shock a very specific crowd that they were performing to.
I believe his exact words were, I wanted to remind the Germans of their biggest shame.
Yeah. And albeit very childish, we can all admit that wasn't a very smart thing
it's not
to
a decision
do, given the worldwide LinkedIn kind of world we live in now. But at the same time, I can't exactly subscribe to their lambasting of him because we all know the intent behind it, no matter what they like to say it was. It was a very big trolling act. It wasn't any kind of representation of himself.
It was very extreme and arguably heavy-handed satire is the way I saw it. And it wasn't a pro-Nazi statement. It was really an anti-Nazi statement of, I'm going to piss you all off reminding you of what your ancestors did. That was an awful atrocity.
Right. It's like, you want to pretend like this image never existed? Well, here it is for you to fucking acknowledge.
And that is a thing in Germany. Like, you're not allowed to even like display that stuff, and certain like stuff around the world wars is like basically outlawed. So,
right.
You know,
a friend of mine had to get
an anti-censorship statement.
Here's another one to speak about the youth and how you can't account people for something they did when they were young. A friend of mine, who they went over to tour Europe, Germany included, he had to get an old tattoo covered up because we were listening to, or I wasn't, but they were listening to a band called Moonblood when we were really young. And he thought the lyric blood and soil just stood for like personal whatever. He didn't take it as being a very popular racist statement. We didn't know we were fucking kids. So he got a lot of warnings from people about that tattoo that was seen online, which didn't represent him in any form at that point anyways. So he got it covered up because as much as, you know, you don't want to have people dictate what you do with your body, at the same time, it was a misrepresentation of what it may have actually been. And it just wasn't worth it to try to defend the intent behind getting that phrase tattooed.
Yeah. So. That's personal growth. That's making better decisions later on. It's just another reason not to get tattoos until you're older too.
That too.
Oh God. But yeah, well, going back to the Toke thing, the other thing that makes me think of is that I see that incident and the Behemoth incident tearing up the Bible as very similar.
Yeah,
but other people won't see it that way. It's
exactly the same
but
thing. But
the difference is everyone's going to defend Nurgle because, the Polish government, they're super religious and Catholic and Christian, and like those people are bad. And so therefore Nurgle's like this brave guy on the right side of history.
And they're too big to go after.
With Host, it's like, oh no, like he's the bad guy in this situation because of X, Y, and Z. But ultimately, I feel like the statement in both of those situations was very much the same. It was just presented in a different way in a different context to a different group of people.
And I'll just go ahead and say it. In a lot of ways, with this dichotomy, the Antifa are pussies because they only go after the little guys. They'll never go after Vatane. There's certain things about them where I don't think of them as racist or anything, but there's a few things they've done where I'm just like, I don't know if I'd have done that.
Yeah, they get pulled into the controversy plenty. Do they not go
they'll
after
never
them?
go
I
after
feel like
Behemoth.
they do.
They'll never go after Behemoth. They'll never go after Mayhem, who have a very colored past of a lot of fucked up stuff, including racism, which not a lot of people acknowledge. And they'll never go after any of these big bands. They only go after the little guys.
Yeah. And the reality, too, is that these bands aren't going to stop touring. They're just going to adapt. They're going to figure out which venues will still book them, which ones won't bow to pressure. How can they market their stuff so that people may not even know necessarily like where they're going to be at, or even go the route of Horna, where, our show gets shut down. We have our fans organize like street show block party, and we end up making even more money. It's like, again, you're kind of driving it underground. And again, my argument is like, let's say it is like an actual Nazi band. Now you're not driving the Nazi band out. You're just driving them deeper and deeper underground, where it's harder and harder to have that mixed audience, and it's more of an echo chamber, more of a bubble where bad thoughts breed, as opposed to when it's above ground at a mainstream venue where it's a mixed audience, because God knows it's not going to be a crowd full of Nazis. It's going to be like maybe a handful of people with bad ideologies mixed in with some just typical everyday people. And that might be the moment that you had over time where you got exposed to other things and other ideas and learned that, hey, this is wrong. I'm not going to do this anymore. That's what it takes.
Well, there's also a lot of aspects for the accused to be smarter about how they go about things. Like, remember the Agalok accusations?
Yeah, there's been so much stuff that I've lost track of some of them.
Well,
so
it's when they were on tour with a ambient kind of electronica act that they had deemed a little sketchy, which
a little spicy.
Yeah, which it was kind of like, whatever. It really wasn't. It wasn't no Death in June or anything, but Agalok completely ignored everything the Antifa did or said. And that drove the Antifa up the fucking wall because it lost all of its speed. Yep. Without that back and forth, they have nothing.
Yep. So. They thrive on reaction. I talk about this constantly.
Yeah.
Without the pushback, there's no momentum. And so I always tell people, and I've abided by this too, if that happens, if you get called out and they're in the wrong, say nothing. That is the best thing you can do. Say and do nothing. Completely ignore it, and it will go away.
And I agree, which contradicts my initial statement in the beginning of standing up for yourself. But,
But that is a way of standing up for yourself.
Yeah, that is true.
It's just a specific tactic.
I'm more of an outspoken type person. So that's where I'm like, I agree, but at the same time, I'm also a hypocrite.
I am too by nature, but let me tell you, I have learned through various just life experiences and learning vicarious through others and my career and family life and whatever. I'd say learning to just bite my tongue is one of the most important things I've ever learned. There's like so many things I like to say, and God, I mean, I run a podcast, so obviously I like talking and the sound of my own voice. So I talk too much at times. So learning to be able to just shut up sometimes is like so valuable, and it's served me well in specific situations too, where it's just like, you know what? I could comment on this. I could do all these things, and I'll even like reach out to other people who I think can weigh in on the situation, be like, am I in the wrong? This is what I'm thinking about doing. And that allowed me to kind of cool off, and people were like, no, man, like you're right, but don't do anything. Like just sleep on it, whatever. And by the next day, I'm like, you know what? It really doesn't matter. And I say nothing and it goes away. And I see that happen with certain bands that play things smart too, where they just, if they don't feed into it, then it goes away so much faster. People forget about it and they move on. And those people move on to the next target because they're like sharks just looking for blood in the water.
Right.
And
yeah, there have been occasions where they show up to shows and attack the fans, which is the ultimate cowardice in my eyes. Like, okay, going after the band is one thing. When you go after their fans, that just makes you the most fucked up person ever.
Yeah, especially with violence.
People, I guarantee you, a lot of the people, they don't have any kind of ideology behind anything. They're just there to have a good time and experience music that they like listening to. And it's not like you're sitting around interviewing them, why are you at this show, and then making a judgment. No, they're just attacking people.
Yeah. And I'm anti-violence across the board. Like, you know, it's one thing if people are moshing at a show and it's like mutual and they're picking each other up and, you know, doing their thing, fine. But when it comes to like actually hurting people, I don't care if you're Antifa. I don't care if you're a white nationalist. Don't start fights at the shows. Like, to leave that shit at home. We're here to enjoy the music.
It's now entered the world of comedy because I'm a big stand-up comedy connoisseur my whole life, just as much as music. And like last night, I listened to that Legion of Skanks episode where they had that Milo Yiannopoulos guy. I'll admit, as much as that dude's just a fucked up troll, he's nothing else but a troll. Whatever. It was funny. But what was funnier to me was the online hoopla preceding it, because they're like, Milo was dead. You didn't hear shit about him for a long time.
Yeah, he dropped off.
Freaked out about this. They gave him attention and a It's not the lead that this podcast giving him a platform. It might not have even gotten a whole lot of downloads without the attention. The Antifa gave Milo another fucking platform and more attention and everything he wants and needs to be relevant.
That's the irony again. It's you know, if that episode had aired and just a few people listened to it that were like fans of the show, and then it would have just lingered into obscurity and disappeared and not even been a thing. But as soon as it becomes a headline because people are protesting it and angry about it, that gets more and more ears on it. And frankly, that's how I've discovered a ton of stuff that I ended up kind of getting into, was like, oh, these people are mad about this thing. I'm like, oh, well, now I want to check that out. What's that all about? And sometimes I end up being like, oh, this guy's pretty funny. This guy's pretty cool. These people are out of their minds. And then like now the person has a new fan because of them. It's like, thanks for
every step they take, they're tripping over their own dicks. So
yeah. And again, like bringing up The Simpsons again, one of my favorite lines to use is there's that Halloween episode where they're all getting attacked by the giant like mascots that have come to life.
Yes.
And the way they beat the mascots is by doing that just don't look, look, and by ignoring them, they all die and go away.
Someone needs to make a GIF out of that so we can just use that as a reply for everything.
Yeah. I believe I've found one in the past for that. I'm just like, anytime I see somebody trolling, and I don't care like what side they're on, but if I can tell that like, oh, this person's just trying to get a bite of the limelight by being controversial, I'll just throw up that picture or that GIF and just be like, just don't look. If you just don't look, it goes away. People just don't know when to be quiet, because that's often the best medicine.
I'll admit, in my past, and it still bleeds every now and then, it still pops up today if I'm not careful, I was a big troll about a lot of things, and that's what kept me going was everyone's reaction to things I was saying and doing. And that only fed me with the way I was. So
it's that fight. We just live for that fight sometimes. And that feeds it more than anything. And I've seen other examples of it too. Like Louis C.K.'s career was kind of dead in the water. And then he did that little show. And I swear, if he had done that show and nobody talked about it, nobody knew about it, I think he would still be kind of in the same place. But because that recording got out and everybody got up in arms about it, and it became national news and another headline, I know a lot of people who were like, yeah, I heard that routine and I thought it was hilarious. And they rejuvenated their it reminded them that like, oh yeah, I love Louis C.K. because he just doesn't give a fuck. And and it reignited their passion.
I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here and say, honestly, like with whatever, if you were to believe what other people are saying, what he did and what he was falsely accused of, or at least exaggeratedly.
Well, he came forward and admitted to at least some of it.
Yeah, some of it was kind of creepy, but there was a lot worse going on. Like, I think he just got scapegoated and they wanted to take down someone big.
There's some of that. I will put out there, like, especially as somebody who works with a lot of like sexual abuse and sexual assault victims and things of that nature. Like there was the problem for me about that situation is there was a power differential. And because he was kind of more in control of the situation and there was some fear and anxiety for the other person of like, oh, what's he going to do if I say no or I like leave the room or whatever? Is he going to get mad and like ruin my career? So I think on that level of it, the fact that it was non-consensual does bother me. And I don't want to like ignore
but it felt
that.
Like they were reacting worse to him than Bill Cosby.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of dynamics to that too. I mean, another documentary that I really enjoyed in the past couple of years was the multi-part series on OJ. Because I learned so much from that because I originally experienced that whole OJ trial as like an idiot grade school kid who knew nothing beyond like, oh yeah, this NFL player who I saw in the Naked Gun movies, like supposedly killed his wife and then was on trial. That's all I really understood about it. But that documentary gives you so much context into how like Rodney King and the zeitgeist of like social justice for Black America was at its peak and how important that was to that whole situation.
That one juror, if we're talking about the same documentary, she admits, it was for Rodney King. And she's like just so unapologetic about it.
At some point, it wasn't even about OJ anymore. It became like a society was on trial.
It's funny.
And that makes so much sense.
I remember that stuff going on and even asking my mom, like, oh my God, when are people going to stop talking about this? Now, ever since that docudrama came out, it's all I can like I watch all the documentaries, I'm reading all the books, like now I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, it's interesting after the fact when you really get to disseminate all the pieces of it, because I always thought it was bizarre. I was like, how did this guy get off? And then when you get the full context of the situation, you're like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like it was almost like right place, right time for him, which is ironic because they make a big point in the documentary about how he didn't want to be seen as this black guy. He just wanted to be seen as a guy, as a famous guy in general. And yet he still managed to, because of his attorneys and the jury and what was happening at the time, kind of use that to his favor to, we're so far off topic right now, but yeah, it's all related though.
We're way off into the ether on that one.
Yeah. Well, we are getting kind of close to a point where we're going to have to sort of wind down. So were there any other things you wanted to...
I have to think about getting ready for work here. So,
well, I appreciate you doing this. And this has been a really great conversation. I'd be more than happy to have you on again. And if you have other people to recommend too.
Yeah, keep my number. Any kind of like different take on something you think I might have an opinion on, you know, whatever. I as much as my friends will roll their eyes about it, I like to talk.
Clearly. You and me both, man. Again, I wouldn't record myself if I didn't.
Just to kind of put a cap on everything, like, I'm not here trying to say that black metal isn't racist and Antifa is completely bad. I'm just here to, I offered to talk because I always seem to be that guy that's stuck in the middle, listening to both sides and telling both sides to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, that's how I feel a lot too. And I appreciate your perspective, like because I can't relate to growing up like in a, I grew up in like a, middle class suburb where it was a predominantly white high school with mostly like white and Indian kids, very few black students, very few Hispanic students. So, I have, that's where I come from in my perspective. And then you've come from this area where like actively people had very strong ideologies against certain groups of people. Whereas mine, it was more so like, we just didn't really see it. We didn't have perspective on it. It was just kind of a non-issue to us. And I had to learn over time, like, oh, I have a huge blind spot in that area. So all the more reason to just get more people on here, or just in conversation in general, who all have different perspectives they can offer to different situations. That's why conversation's so important.
And the older I get, the more that I just keep coming back to the thought of like, everyone's full of shit in some ways. Everyone's biased. Everyone has their own little prejudice, if not racially, but just in a lot of things in life. Everyone, in some way or form, is a little full of shit. Yep. So the back and forths, the discussions, the comparisons, it's all like, it's healthy. So to stamp out opposing opinions, to me, is, it's the most childish thing in the world to just be like, nope, not hearing this, blah, 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 blah. It's just childish.
Yeah. And I would like open invitation. I would have somebody from more of a social justice angle on here too. I'm not cutting them out either. It's just that those types often decline. Like I've even had bands be like, you know what? Don't review us after all, because I don't think we come from the same place. And I'm like, that's a crazy thing to say. That's insane.
Same thing as like people saying, dear God, save us from these Christians. I'm all of like by definition, I am for social justice. But what's going on today, they have painted it as something to be ridiculous and fanatic and there's no reasoning when there needs. That's the problem is when you're trying to combat the a non-reason with more non-reason, we're still in the same fucking place.
Yep. We gotta talk it out. We gotta do it. We gotta be open and just listen. Just fucking listen. And I think that is a good capping point, that everyone's full of shit. Everyone's a hypocrite. Everyone has their blind spots. So that's why, it takes a village for us to all come together and, just see each other's different perspectives on things. And instead of shouting in each other's faces, just listen.
Respect that someone doesn't agree and just walk away. You don't have to make it your mission to like ruin someone's life or just cause them more annoyance.
Yeah.
That's just being bitter and childish.
Yeah. And I'm also saying the message here is not to avoid challenging people too. Like some of the biggest growth moments I've had is because somebody kind of like challenged me on something I really believed. And you better believe like it raised anxiety. I was uncomfortable. I was kind of frustrated about it, but because of the way they presented it and because they weren't outright attacking me, but they were being assertive and just being like, you know what, man, like, I don't agree with you. And here's why. Like it sat uncomfortable, but I ended up learning so many things from being in those types of situations. So challenge, yes, just don't be a dick. That's the message of this podcast.
Yeah, I think we can both agree with that.
All right, man. Well, I'll let you get on and get ready for work. But again, I appreciate your time.
Right. And I'll have my final words be only Peter Steele is real, damn it.
Amen. And that'll do it for this episode of Trench Talk. Please sign up for the mailing list, subscribe, like, share, all that good stuff. Stick around and watch these other videos. If you liked this one, you'll probably like the Deathspell Omega episode, the episode with heavy metal history on metal controversy, episodes with Charlie Fell. Really just sub and stick around. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.